took the fire lookout job on Briar Ridge because the pay was steady and the solitude didn't bother me. At least, that's what I told people. The truth was, I'd been looking for a place where my thoughts wouldn't echo against somebody else's worries. The tower sat deep in the national forest, 20 miles from the ranger station and another 40 from the nearest town. I had a radio, a logbook, canned food, and a truck that could climb the ridge if you asked it politely. The tower itself wasn't much. A 40-foot wooden structure, older than my father, with steps that chirped with every shift of the wind. At the top, a square cabin with windows on all sides, a desk, a radio, and a cot tucked into a corner. I liked the way the world fell away beneath me. I liked the way dusk arrived, like someone dimming a lamp. My first week was uneventful. I'd wake at dawn, scan the timber, log the weather, listen to birds and make their opinions known. At night, I'd read old entries in the logbook, handwritten by lookouts I'd never meet. Most were dull, no smokes, temperature 61, or north wind strong, elk herd moving west. But occasionally, something stranger slipped in. A note from August 1984 read, "Voices from the East Valley, no hikers scheduled." Another from 1997, "Lights below the ridge, not campfires. I watched it for 2 hours." And one, written in shaky handwriting from 2009, "Don't follow the path after midnight. If it calls you, call back with nothing." I laughed at that one until I didn't. The first odd thing happened on day 9, just after sunset. I was finishing a cup of stale coffee when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I froze, listening. The tower was 20 miles from anything with legs. I hadn't seen a single hiker since I'd arrived. The steps were deliberate, slow, heavy, someone climbing with purpose. I grabbed the radio and stepped toward the door. Before I could speak into the mic, the footsteps stopped. Not slowed, not turned around, stopped. The wind took a breath, and the tower felt too still. I opened the door, expecting an animal or maybe some lost backpacker. But the stairs were empty. The clearing below the tower stretched out in untouched snow, not a single track leading in or out. I waited there for a long time before going back inside. That night I slept with the lantern on. Over the next few days, the air grew colder. Snow came hard and fast, choking off the truck trail. I checked in with Ranger White at noon every day, like protocol required. He talked too much about his upcoming retirement and too little about the weird things that happened on the ridge. I debated bringing up the footsteps, but something about his tone made me keep it to myself. I had a feeling if I said it out loud, it would make the whole thing more real. On the 12th night, the radio crackled to life around 2 in the morning. I sat up fast. Nobody used the frequency that late. "Lookout 7, copy," the voice said. Except it wasn't Ranger White, or anyone I recognized. Static swallowed half the message. I pressed the receiver. "This is Lookout 7. Identify yourself." Nothing for a long moment. Then the voice returned, lower, strained, like the speaker was fighting for breath. "You left your logbook open." I stared at the desk. The logbook was indeed open, a pencil sitting across the spine. I hadn't touched it since dusk. The voice cut out, leaving an electric hum that crawled up my arms. I shut the radio off and paced the cabin until sunrise. The next morning, I tried to bring it up with Ranger White, but he didn't answer the noon call. Rare, but not unheard of. I kept scanning the ridge, trying to focus on the job, but every time I leaned toward the window, something caught my eye near the tree line. A figure. Far below, near the trail that curved toward the old fire break, someone stood completely still. Long coat, pale face, posture too rigid to be casual. I squinted, trying to make sense of the shape. When I lifted my binoculars, the figure was gone. That evening, I wrote everything down. The footsteps, the open logbook, the radio call, the figure among the trees. As I finished, I noticed a line at the bottom of the page, 3 words written in different handwriting. You were heard. I dropped the book, hands shaking. I'd been alone up here. No one had entered. No one could have entered. Snow hammered the windows through the night. When I finally slept, I dreamed of walking down the tower steps, flashlight in hand, calling out names I didn't recognize. A woman's voice whispered behind me, but every time I turned, the whisper stayed at my back. The next day, the radio came alive again, but this time, it was just static, rising and falling like breath. When a voice finally broke through, it wasn't calling for me, it was calling for help. Please, please, anyone! A man's voice, strained and uneven. I leaned into the receiver. This is Lookout 7. What's your location? A long silence. Then, barely audible. I'm at the base. The tower creaked. I looked down. The clearing below was empty. No tracks, no movement. But the voice on the radio came again. I see your light. The lantern wasn't on. The only light was the pale morning sun. I backed away from the desk. Something felt deeply wrong, like the air pressure had shifted. Then came the knock. A single, heavy knock on the underside of the cabin floor. As if someone stood directly beneath me on the small landing, rapping once on the boards. I crouched down slowly. The knock came again. Then a third time, steady, rhythmic. Not panicking, not random. A pattern. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. I didn't dare answer. I didn't dare breathe. The knocks stopped only when I reached for the radio. I didn't think so. I turned it off entirely. Hours passed of me pacing the room, listening to the wood strain under the cold, trying not to glance at the windows. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink much either. The next morning, tracks finally appeared. A single set of footprints circled the tower. Not the stairs, the tower. A wide ring, like someone walked around it again and again, dragging their feet through the snow. At least 30 laps, maybe more. The tracks were deep, pressed by something heavy. As I stepped onto the landing to look, I noticed something else. A name carved into the frost on the window behind me. Devin. My name. I scrambled back inside. My stomach felt hollow. I grabbed the logbook to record it, but before I wrote anything, I noticed the previous page was no longer blank. A paragraph had appeared. You shouldn't have opened the door. My breath stopped. I hadn't opened any door. Not once. Not since the footsteps 12 days earlier. The cold in the cabin felt unnatural now, like it came from inside the walls, not the windows. The tower groaned under a breeze I couldn't feel. At noon, Ranger White's voice finally buzzed through the radio, cutting through the dread. Lookout 7, copy. How's the weather? His tone was casual. Too casual. I picked up the receiver, wanting to unload everything. But before I spoke, another voice broke in, on the same frequency. Don't tell him. White didn't react. He kept talking about the station's busted heater and how he was considering early retirement. I lowered the radio slowly. Someone else was on the line. Someone he couldn't hear. That night, the knocking returned, but this time from the roof. Slow, measured taps. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The tapping grew closer to the center of the cabin, as if whoever made the sound was crawling across the shingles on all fours. When the tapping stopped, a shadow crossed the far window. I couldn't see details, only shape, but it stayed there for a long minute, as if studying me. At dawn, I made the decision to leave. Snow or no snow, storm or no storm, I was getting off Briar Ridge. I packed my bag, grabbed the logbook, and stepped onto the landing. Every footprint that had circled the tower was gone, but a new set led from the base of the stairs into the forest. Deep prints, large, and beside them, smaller prints, bare feet. A child's, maybe. Their stride was short, hesitant. The two sets of prints diverged at the tree line. One path went toward the river gorge. The smaller path led toward the old firebreak trail. Then I saw the writing, not carved, not stamped, written with a fingertip across the snow, winding between the prints. Follow which one hears you. The wind erased the message almost immediately. I didn't follow either trail. I walked the opposite way toward the long truck road, each step feeling like my boots weighed 100 pounds. The trees leaned inward, thick with silence. Halfway down the ridge, the radio crackled. "Devin," the voice said, "you left someone behind." I didn't turn it on. I kept walking. When I finally reached the ranger station hours later, Ranger White looked surprised. He asked why I'd come down early. He asked if the cold had gotten to me. I opened my mouth to tell him everything, but the words were too tangled. He said I looked pale. Then he checked the recorder log. Every radio call was archived automatically. There were none from the past 3 days. Not one, not even his own. I didn't go back up the ridge, not even to collect the rest of my gear. The Forest Service replaced me with a new lookout a month later, but he quit after 2 nights. Said he didn't sleep well. Said the tower felt too occupied. Last week, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was the logbook I'd left behind, and a single page, freshly written, in handwriting I didn't recognize. It read, "Tell the next one not to answer when it knows its name." The ink wasn't dry. I went back to Japan in the winter, because that's the season when that part of Ishikawa feels most like itself. Summer turns everything into a postcard for tourists. Winter strips it down to the bones. You see which buildings lean, which roads sink, which places the snow respects enough to leave mostly alone. My family used to own a small ryokan near Kaga Onsen, not far from the Daishoji River. They sold it years ago after my grandfather died, but the building is still there under a different name and a brighter sign. I wasn't going back to the inn, though. I was going back because of a school that technically doesn't exist anymore, even though it's still standing. It was an elementary school up on a low hill at the edge of town, built in the 60s and closed sometime in the early 2000s when enrollment dropped and the municipality merged everything into a newer complex closer to the station. When I was little, my mother would walk me up there to pick up my cousin, and in my memory the place is always full of noise. Kids shouting, whistles blowing, that hollow echo of a ball bouncing on gym floorboards. I hadn't thought about the school in years. I live in Tokyo now. My life is screens and trains and meetings where nobody says exactly what they mean. But a few winters back, I started having this recurring dream about the schoolyard. Snow falling in slow motion, the jungle gym half buried, a single set of footprints leading from the gate to the back corner of the grounds and then just stopping. It wasn't a nightmare, just persistent. Always the same angle, as if I were standing by the front gate looking in. When work finally gave me a long enough break, I booked a flight north and a rental car. Officially, I told people I just wanted to visit the hot springs and see my parents. But in my head, the trip had one quiet purpose. Go stand by that gate and see if the place matched what my brain had been feeding me at 3 in the morning. The day I arrived, the snow was doing that slow, patient fall that looks peaceful until you realize how deep it's going to get. The streets back from the station were narrower than I remembered. The convenience store on the corner had become a laundromat. The ryokan my family used to own had a fresh coat of paint and a new name, but the shape of the roofline was the same. My parents were happy to see me, and equally happy to hand me a list of small chores they didn't want to do themselves. Light shopping, a run to the bank, helping my father move boxes in the storage shed. I did all that on the first day. I didn't mention the school. I wasn't sure how I'd bring it up without sounding strange. On the second morning, while my parents were out visiting my aunt, I put on my boots, grabbed a pair of gloves that were slightly too small, and started walking up the road I remembered from childhood. It curved along the river and then cut inland, climbing gently between low houses and winter bare persimmon trees. The higher I got, the quieter it became. The snow softened the edges of everything until the whole town felt like it had been wrapped in cotton. I knew I was close when I saw the old stone marker half buried on the side of the road. The letters were worn, but still legible. The name of the school, carved years ago when someone believed there'd always be enough children to fill its classrooms. The hilltop had changed in some ways and not in others. The chain-link fence around the school grounds still stood, though parts of it sagged under the weight of snowdrifts. The front gate was ajar, propped open by a wedge of ice. Beyond it, the yard stretched out in a flat, white sheet. The jungle gym was there, in the exact spot my dream had placed it, cold metal bars forming a dome that poked out of the snow like ribs. The school building itself was a 2-story rectangle with wide windows and a central entrance. Some of the glass panes were boarded up, others were just opaque with frost. A notice was taped crookedly near the front door, protected by brittle plastic. I brushed the snow away from it with one glove. It was an official sign from the city, dated almost a decade ago. It said the building was being used as storage for the local education board. Desks, chairs, old teaching materials. No entry without authorization. I stepped through the gate anyway. I told myself I'd just walk the perimeter, take in the view, maybe snap a photo to send to my cousin. The snow crunched under my boots in that satisfying deep way it does before anyone else has walked on it. The air smelled like pine and cold concrete. I stopped by the jungle gym and turned slowly, matching the angle from my dreams. The view lined up almost perfectly. The school building to my left, the fence ahead, the drop-off toward the river valley beyond. But there was one thing my dreams hadn't shown. Near the far corner of the yard, just before the back fence, something small and dark broke the white surface. At first, I thought it was a piece of equipment, maybe a bench or a storage bin someone had forgotten. As I got closer, I saw it was a cluster of tiny shoes. They were arranged in a rough circle on a patch of ground someone had intended to keep clear, but hadn't fully managed to shove free of snow. 7 pairs, maybe 8. Children's indoor shoes, the kind with rubber soles and canvas tops, scuffed at the toes. They were older styles, yellowed, faded, not anything a kid would wear now. Each pair had been set down neatly side by side, toes pointing inward. In front of the circle of shoes sat a small white dish with a half-burnt incense stick melted into the center. The ash told me it hadn't been lit recently, but not in the distant past either. Weeks, maybe, not years. Beside the dish was something else, a laminated card with a short column of names written in careful black marker. Next to each name was a single date. I didn't recognize any of the names, but the dates ran over a span of 30 years. My skin prickled under my jacket. The cold felt sharper, as if the air had thinned. I stood there longer than I meant to. A crow called somewhere behind the school, breaking the silence. That snapped me out of it. I took my phone out, snapped a photo of the shoes and the card, and walked back toward the gate. I told myself I'd ask my parents about it over dinner. Maybe it was some local memorial thing. Small towns do that, keep rituals even after the official story has faded. By the time I got back down the hill, snow had started to fall heavier. My mother fussed over my wet hair and asked where I'd wandered off to. I said I'd gone to the old school without thinking. Both my parents fell quiet for a second, not long enough that most people would notice, but I know their conversational rhythms. It was a pause with weight. "You shouldn't go up there alone in winter," my father said finally. "The path can be slippery." I said the path was fine. I mentioned the shoes by the back fence like it was a casual detail, something mildly curious. My mother frowned. "Is someone still doing that?" she said. "Doing what?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. Some people don't know when to let go." My father gave her a look that said, "Enough." Then he changed the subject. I let it go for the moment, but that night, lying under the heavy futon in my old room, I pulled up the photo again. I zoomed in on the laminated card, trying to read the names and dates through the glare. One of the older dates, in the late 80s, had been circled in red marker. A small hand-drawn bell sat next to it. I dreamed of bells that night. Not the high, thin ring of a handheld one, but the deep clang of the brass bell that used to hang outside the school to mark the start of first period. In the dream, it wasn't attached to the building. It was sitting in the middle of the yard, half buried in snow, ringing without anyone touching the rope. The next morning, my mother caught me staring at my phone over breakfast and asked what I was looking at. I slid the picture toward her. She sighed the way she does when she's about to say something she's been holding back for years. "When I was in middle school," she said, "a boy from that elementary school disappeared. Winter term. They said he must have fallen into the river. They searched for days. Nothing." She kept her gaze on the table as she spoke. "Your grandfather helped with the search. He came home soaked and angry. He said the teachers lost track of him between the school and the river path. Some children said they heard the bell ring, even though nobody pulled the rope. I asked her if the shoes were for him. Maybe at first," she said. "But these things grow. People add names, accidents, illness. Some parents never move on. They say it's for all the children who didn't get to grow up here." My father made a small sound. Not disagreement, just discomfort. "That hill is cold," he said. buildings remember too much. You'd think that would have been enough for me. A sad local story, a ritual that made sense in its own way. But once your attention hooks on something, you start looking for it without meaning to. 2 days later, when a heavy snowstorm was forecast, my parents suggested I stay in, enjoy the bath, maybe go with my father to the pachinko parlor. I nodded, then waited until they'd left for errands. As soon as the house was quiet, I put on my coat and boots and started walking back up the hill. The sky had that flat, iron gray look that promises serious weather. The wind had picked up, carrying fine snow that stung my face. By the time I reached the school gate, a white film had softened the footprints I'd left days earlier. The building loomed, its windows even more opaque. The yard felt different, heavier, like stepping into a room where someone had just been arguing and gone quiet the moment you opened the door. The circle of shoes was still there, but an 8th pair had been added. Newer than the others, a small pair of pink sneakers dusted with snow. No laminated card this time, just a folded piece of paper tucked neatly inside one shoe. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to know if the paper was blank. I walked the perimeter, following the fence line toward the back of the grounds. Behind the school, the hill sloped down toward a narrow road, and beyond that, the river valley. The trees here grew closer together, their branches sagging under snow, forming a sort of corridor. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind in the metal supports of the jungle gym, a low metallic vibration. Then it became distinct. A bell. 3 clear rings. Not loud, not close, but unmistakable. I stopped walking. The sound seemed to be coming from inside the building, somewhere near the center. Maybe the old hallway where the classrooms met. I told myself it could be anything. Loose metal shifting in the cold. A chunk of ice falling, stirring an echo. Buildings make noises all the time. You only notice them when you're already expecting something. I checked my watch. It was 3:15. I had no idea what time the bell used to ring for the end of classes, but somehow the timing felt wrong. Too late or too early. I couldn't remember which. The door at the rear of the building was unlocked. It shouldn't have been, but the frame had swollen and warped with age, and either someone had forgotten to lock it, or the lock itself had given up. Inside, the air was colder than outside. I could see my breath in front of my face in faint bursts. The smell of dust and old paper wrapped around me. Classrooms opened off both sides of the hall. Many of the desks had been stacked and pushed to one side. Posters still clung to some walls, their edges curled. Someone had used one room to store cardboard boxes filled with outdated textbooks. One box had split open, spilling kana practice sheets onto the floor like drifts of paper snow. I made my way toward where I thought the main hall and bell rope would be on the front side of the building. My boots creaked on the wooden floor. The sound of the wind outside dimmed until all I could hear was the faint hum of my own pulse in my ears. The main entrance hall was just as I remembered in shape, though smaller than it had seemed in childhood. Rows of cubbies for indoor shoes lined the walls. A chalkboard hung near the office door, half erased. Someone had written something there years ago in big, careful letters, then wiped it away without quite finishing the job. The faint outline remained, like a ghost sentence. The bell rope hung through a slot in the ceiling above the entrance. It was perfectly still. I stared at it for a long moment, waiting for someone to give it a tug. Nothing happened. The silence pressed in. Just as I turned to leave, something brushed the back of my jacket. light and quick, like a child's hand brushing past you in a crowd. I spun around. The hall was empty. My heart thudded against my ribs, too fast to be useful. I laughed out loud, the sound thin and strained. I told myself I just felt my own hood shift against my neck as I turned. I walked back through the halls, glancing into each classroom as I passed. In one, sunlight managed to pierce the frost on the window just enough to throw pale shapes across the floor. Desk shadows, chair legs, nothing more. In another, someone had taped student drawings to a cupboard door and never taken them down. Crayon houses, smiling suns, names neatly printed underneath in hiragana. One drawing had been torn halfway down the middle, the two halves held together with yellowed tape. The picture was of the school itself, drawn from the perspective of someone standing by the gate and looking in. In the snow at the far corner of the yard, the child had drawn a dark, vague shape. For some reason, that's the thing that made me decide to leave. By the time I stepped back outside, snow was falling harder. The wind funneled across the open yard, kicking up small spirals. I headed straight for the gate, not looking back until I reached it. When I did, I saw someone standing by the circle of shoes. From that distance, with snow in my eyes, all I could make out was a small figure, wearing what looked like a dark school uniform coat. No hat, no scarf. Just standing there, facing the shoes, my head slightly bowed. I opened my mouth to call out, but the word "hey" froze on my tongue. Something about the stillness of the figure felt wrong. Not natural stillness, like someone bundled against the cold. It was more like the stillness of a photograph. I blinked. A gust of wind blew a sheet of snow sideways across the yard. When it cleared, the figure was gone. No footprints marked the space where they'd been standing. That night, the storm hit properly. Wind rattled the shutters of my parents' house. Snow piled against the sliding door to the garden. I lay awake listening to the muffled roar of it, and trying not to picture the school sitting alone on its hill, its windows black, its doors swollen shut against the cold. Sometime around midnight, when the house had quieted from shifting and the heater's clicks had settled into a rhythm, I heard a bell, not in my dream, not in memory. Clear, faint, coming from outside. 3 notes, spaced evenly. I sat up in the dark, pulse racing, straining to hear over the wind. It came again, a little louder. Not close enough to be on our property, but not so far that it could be dismissed. I told myself someone's metal sign had come loose. The neighbors' pipes were knocking. Any explanation was better than the one my brain was offering. In the morning, I asked my parents if they'd heard it. My mother said no. My father hesitated, then said maybe, but it was probably just the temple bell down by the river, distorted by the wind. The temple hadn't rung its bell in winter for years. After that, I stayed away from the school for a few days. I soaked in the hot springs. I helped my father shovel snow. I took my mother shopping. I tried to play the part of visiting child, dutiful and cheerful. But small things kept pulling at me. At the supermarket, I overheard 2 older women in the next aisle talking about the old place on the hill and parents who can't move on. On the local news, a scrolling text bar mentioned a car accident on a mountain road in a neighboring town that had taken a child's life. At the pachinko parlor, one of my father's friends asked if I'd seen the shoes lined up like they're waiting for roll call, and then laughed too loud and too quickly. I went back up the hill on the last full day before my flight. The sky was clear, unnaturally blue after so many gray days. The snow on the road had been plowed into high, dirty banks. The school looked smaller in the sudden sunlight, less like a looming presence and more like what it was, an old building that no one had found a reason to tear down. The yard, though, held a new detail. Someone had cleared a narrow path from the gate to the circle of shoes, pushing the snow aside neatly. The shoes themselves had been repositioned, now forming a full ring. 10 pairs, some old, some newer. In the center of the circle, where the dish and incense stick had been, stood a small brass bell on a wooden base. Not the big bell, a smaller one, the kind teachers use sometimes to call a class to attention. There was also a new laminated card. The names and dates were typed this time, in neat columns. At the bottom of the list, below the last name and date, someone had left a blank space. No name, just an empty line, and a dotted one below it, as if waiting to be filled. The wind had died completely. The yard was so quiet, I could hear the faint ticking of branches contracting in the cold. Without really deciding to, I stepped into the circle. It felt like crossing an invisible border, like stepping onto a train platform and realizing too late that you're standing past the yellow line. Up close, I could see that some of the shoes had tiny, embroidered name tags still sewn inside. The stitching was faded, but careful. Someone had put each stitch there for a real child, a long time ago. I looked down at the typed card again. My eyes snagged on the circled date from the 80s. Next to it, the last name on the list matched the one written on the card I'd seen in the shoe days ago. Thought of what my mother had said, of the boy who vanished somewhere between school and river, of the bell that rang when no one touched it. I realized then that the bell in the center of the circle was not covered in snow. It was perfectly clean, as if someone had picked it up and wiped it recently, as if someone had used it. I stepped back out of the circle, anxious not to disturb anything. My boots slipped a little on the packed snow. I caught myself on the fence and laughed once, brittle and thin. On the way back through town, I stopped by the small local library, a holdover from another era. The librarian was an older man who'd been there for as long as I could remember. I asked, as casually as I could, if they still kept old local newspapers. Of course, he said. People here don't throw anything away. He led me to a back room with shelves of bound volumes. I found the year my mother had mentioned. It took some time. Winter issues, small local columns. But eventually I saw it. A short article, tight text, no photo. Elementary school student missing after class excursion, it said. It mentioned the boy's name, the location, the time. It mentioned icy conditions near the river. It ended with a sentence that lodged itself uncomfortably in my mind. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace of the student has been found as of this printing. I checked later issues. There were follow-up notes. Search scaled back. Memorial service held. At no point did any article say the boy had been found. As I slid the bound volume back onto the shelf, something fell out from between the pages. A folded sheet of paper, yellowed and fragile. I caught it before it hit the ground. It was a hand-drawn map of the school grounds and surrounding hill. A child's drawing by the look of it. The school was a rectangle with big windows. The jungle gym is a circle. The fence is a wavy line. The river is a blue ribbon. In the corner of the schoolyard, a A small dark square had been drawn. Next to it, in hiragana, was a single word. Here. That night, before I left for Tokyo the next day, I walked up the hill one last time. My parents thought I was going to the convenience store. The sky had that bruised look again, like it was trying to decide whether to snow. The path to the circle of shoes had been disturbed. New prints, adult-sized, had partially filled it. The bell in the center was gone. For a moment, I thought someone had finally decided to clear away the whole display. But the shoes were still there. The card was still there. The bottom line was no longer blank. My name was typed there now. The date was that day. I stared at it until my eyes blurred, refusing to accept what I was seeing. I stepped back from the circle, heart pounding. I looked around wildly, half expecting someone to jump out and declare it a tasteless joke. No one was there. I turned and stomped back down the hill fast enough that my lungs ached. By the time I reached my parents' house, the first flakes of new snow had begun to fall. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. I didn't sleep much. I left before dawn for the airport. On the plane back to Tokyo, I told myself a dozen rational explanations. Someone was messing with me. Someone else shared my name. I'd misread the letters in my rush. It was easy to lie to myself at 30,000 feet. Back in the city, the noise and light washed over me, and for a while the hill and the school and the circle of shoes felt far away. Ghost stories belong to places, and I thought maybe I'd left that one behind. 3 weeks later, on a gray Tuesday, my phone buzzed as I was getting off the Marunouchi line. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice asked if I was who I am, full name and all. Yes, I said, distracted. Who is this? This is the Ishikawa Prefectural Office, she said politely. We're updating some property records from your family's area. There was a minor discrepancy with a parcel near the old elementary site. Nothing serious. We wanted to confirm your current address. We went through the usual bureaucratic dance. She confirmed. I confirmed. Near the end, I asked what the discrepancy was, more out of residual anxiety than real curiosity. There was a duplication of a name, she said. We had an old ledger. It listed you as a contact and someone of the same name as a former student guardian from many years ago. It caused some confusion when we digitized it. We're cleaning it up now. I asked how long ago. Oh, she said lightly. Before you were born. Same kanji, same reading. Just a coincidence. The records sometimes do that, you know. I thanked her and hung up. On the crowded platform, under fluorescent lights, that explanation felt thin and slippery, like a patch of ice beneath slush. That night, as I lay in my small Tokyo apartment, with the city humming outside and no snow in sight, I dreamed of school again. Only this time, I wasn't at the gate looking in. I was standing in the circle of shoes, facing the building. The bell in the center was ringing without anyone touching it. Through the frosted windows, small shapes moved in the classrooms, shadows of children running in loops, replaying the same paths over and over. I woke up with my heart racing and my mouth dry. I still don't know what to do with any of this. On paper, it's just a closed school on a hill, a memorial somebody made and never dismantled, a coincidence of names, the kind of thing you could turn into a campfire story if you wanted to scare kids. But sometimes when winter comes to Tokyo and the air turns clear and hard, I swear I hear a faint bell behind the traffic and the trains. 3 notes, evenly spaced. I tell myself it's a sound from the street. I tell myself it's nothing. Then I picture that blank line on the laminated card filling itself in. I picture shoes being lined up again, making room for one more pair. And for a few seconds I'm standing on that hill, the air sharp and still, the snow unbroken, except for a single narrow path. Some places remember whether we like it or not. Some places keep a roll call even after class has ended. I didn't plan on working overnights at Whitley's Market. Nobody plans something like that. You end up there because the hours don't scare you as much as the rent does. I used to think nothing dangerous ever happened in a grocery store. Just beeps, carts, and the occasional rotten smell from produce. Then again, I'd also never worked in a store that stayed open 24 hours, despite being miles outside town, surrounded by forest on all sides, with a parking lot that felt way too dark even with the lights on. Whitley sat between 2 long stretches of road, nothing on either side except trees, truck turnouts, and a gas station 5 miles away that shut down at 10. The store wasn't big. 3 freezer rows, 8 aisles, a bakery counter nobody used after sundown, and a deli that shut at 5, even though the sign said 8. The night manager was a guy named Colin, nearing 60, working like he'd been carved out of old cardboard. He was polite enough but carried the tiredness of someone who'd already spent too many years doing tasks in silent buildings. My shift ran from midnight to 7. The first few hours were dead quiet. Occasional trucker buying energy drinks, 1 or 2 night shift nurses picking up snacks before collapsing into bed. After 2:30, though, we rarely saw another living soul until sunrise. I started noticing things my second week. Small things. Things I dismissed because admitting they bothered me felt childish. It started with aisle 6. That was the cereal aisle, but it also had the bulk bins and the ice cream freezer at the end. Every night around 2, I'd pass by and get hit with the strangest feeling, like the aisle had one more person in it than I could see. Nothing dramatic. Just that shift in your chest when you think someone else is standing behind you. Once, I even turned and said, "Sorry," assuming a cart was behind me. Nothing there. I brushed it off as lack of sleep, the boredom of night shifts messing with my senses. But then things got a little stranger. One night I was restocking the soup aisle when I heard faint footsteps on the polished tiles, not heavy ones. Soft, slow steps, almost cautious. They came from the front of the store, moved down an aisle parallel to mine, then stopped. I leaned around the corner expecting to see a late-night shopper. Empty. I went back to stacking cans when I heard it again. The same slow steps, this time coming down my own aisle, steady and deliberate. I stood up, turned, and looked straight at the length of aisle 5. Not a single person. The sound faded like someone stepping onto carpet, even though all we had was tile. I told myself tile echoes. Tile does weird things, but it gnawed at me. Colin had a way of appearing right behind you when you weren't expecting it, so later I asked him, half joking, whether the store was haunted. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smirk. He just said, "Stick to the lit areas after 2:30. Shadows get long in this place." I thought he was joking. I really did. But he turned away right after he said it, like he regretted speaking at all. A few days later, I was cleaning up a spill near the freezers when I noticed handprints on the glass doors. Nothing unusual at first. They were too low to be adult prints, smudged like a kid had pressed both palms there. But we didn't get kids at 3 in the morning. Nobody brought their children grocery shopping at that hour, let alone let them wander the freezer aisle. I wiped them off and kept working. 10 minutes later, I walked past again and saw the prints had reappeared, a little higher this time. Fresh smudges in perfect palm shapes, like someone standing just behind me had pressed their hands to the glass the second I wasn't looking. That night, I stayed within sight of the front registers, close to the lights. Even then, I could hear soft movements from deeper in the store. Stock shifting, boxes settling, light tapping on metal shelves, not loud enough to be a person, not random enough to be nothing. Then came the issue with the PA system. Our store only had one microphone, kept behind the service desk. Sometimes, when the wires got old, it would pop or hiss with interference. But around 3 one morning, as I was breaking down cardboard in the back, the speaker crackled to life overhead. A faint voice whispered something short, too soft to catch. I thought it was interference at first, until I realized the rhythm of the static had intention. It tried forming words. It whispered again. 2 syllables, maybe 3. I walked out of the back room fast, scanning the ceiling for the nearest speaker. Before I reached the front, the PA crackled one more time and dropped into complete silence. When I reached the service desk, the microphone was unplugged. I told myself to quit acting paranoid. But the next night, things escalated. I arrived at midnight and went straight to the stock room to check the delivery from the day shift. The pallets always arrived wrapped in clear plastic. But this time, one pallet had the wrap torn open on one side. Not sliced, ripped, like someone had clawed through it with brutal force. Some of the boxes inside had been knocked over. A few were crushed. I called out to Colin, but he stayed at the registers sorting receipts. He told me to leave it until morning and that the day crew would handle it. My stomach nodded in a way I didn't understand fully. Around 2:40, I noticed something wrong with the front door. The automatic doors were glass, easy to see through. The sensors always clicked when someone approached. But as I walked by with a box of canned tomatoes, the door slid open, even though no one stood outside. I froze. The cold air rushed in, lifting a few stray receipts from the rug. I waited for someone to walk in, a late-night driver, a lost traveler. But no one came through. The lights in the parking lot cast long beams across the empty asphalt. The trees far beyond that swayed in the wind. The door stayed open for almost 10 seconds before sliding shut again. I backed away slowly. Every instinct in my body whispered that something had been standing there, just outside the threshold, watching. I convinced myself the sensors were dirty or misaligned, but later, while shelving coffee, I noticed something further down the aisle. A jar of instant coffee sitting in the middle of the floor, upright, perfectly centered. I hadn't put it there. I knew no customer had walked by. I picked it up, placed it back, and continued with my work. A few minutes later, another jar sat on the floor. Same spot. I didn't touch that one. These things kept happening, small but impossible to ignore. The footsteps, the prints on the freezer. The doors are moving. The PA whispered, the sense of being watched. But what finally broke me happened during a heavy snowstorm about a month into the job. Only 2 of us were working, me and Colin. He was in the back, radioing the district manager about closing early. The storm was bad. Plows hadn't cleared the highway. Visibility was shot. I was fronting shelves on aisle 3 when the power flickered. The lights hummed, dimmed, and then steadied. I kept working, but my pulse kicked up. Something about the air felt charged. At the end of the aisle, I saw a figure, a person, a man maybe, wearing a dark coat, standing perfectly still at the opposite end. His back was to me. He looked toward the deli section, motionless. I blinked hard. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. I stepped forward slowly, scanning every aisle. Nothing. No sound of footsteps. No swish of fabric. No door chime. I walked to the deli area. All the slicers were turned off. Chairs stacked. Nothing disturbed. Then I saw fresh footprints on the tile. Wet footprints, like someone who'd just come in from the snow. They started in front of the deli case and pathed toward aisle 5. I followed them, breathing shallowly. The footprints stopped halfway down aisle 5. It just ended. No smudge, no trail, no melting puddle, just a clean stop. I crouched, staring at the final print. To my right, a box slid off a shelf and hit the floor. Not fell, slid, like someone had pushed it. That was when I felt air move behind me. A faint shift, as if someone were stepping close, leaning in, about to speak. I turned so fast I nearly slipped. Nobody there. I walked backward out of the aisle, not turning my back to anything. When I reached the front end of the store, I saw Colin rolling the cigarette cabinet out to the counter. He shot me a glance. "You hear it?" he asked. "Hear what?" My voice cracked. "The humming." I stopped moving. Was that what I had been hearing? A faint hum. I thought it was machinery, but now that he said it, I could hear it. A low, persistent vibration. Not electricity, not lights. Something deeper. "It happens when the snow piles up," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Pressure changes." He kept talking like he was trying to convince himself. I knew he was lying. After that night, I didn't want to go back, but quitting a job without a backup wasn't an option. The next few shifts were surprisingly calm. No footprints, no movement, no whispers. I almost talked myself into believing exhaustion had played tricks on me. Then came Sunday night when everything went wrong. A woman came in around 1:30, bundled tight in a winter jacket. She moved strangely, turning her head too slowly, walking like her feet weren't fully connected to the floor. She didn't take a cart, just wandered aisles. In one aisle, she stood for a long time staring at the shelves, not moving. At another, she seemed to read a label for 10 minutes straight, holding the jar mere inches from her face. Something about her posture bothered me. Something was off, but I couldn't place it. At one point, she walked past me and whispered something. "Don't look at aisle 8. Then she kept walking. 5 minutes later, she left. Bought nothing. Said nothing. I stood at the end of aisle 8, staring down the long stretch of fluorescent-lit shelves. The air felt wrong again, dense, tight. I stepped in carefully. Halfway down, I froze. A child stood at the end of the aisle, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a thin t-shirt like it wasn't winter, long hair hanging forward so I couldn't see their face, bare feet on the tile, just standing, completely still. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. When I blinked, the child was gone. Vanished. No footprints, no sound. I ran to get Colin, but as I approached the front, I saw him staring at the security monitors. All 4 screens showed static for the same aisle, the one I'd just been in. Every camera, same aisle, same interference. "Did you see?" I started. He lifted one hand to silence me. "Don't tell me," he said. "The less you acknowledge, the better." That sentence terrified me more than anything else. We locked ourselves at the registers for the last half of the shift. Neither of us walked the aisles alone. The next morning, I checked that aisle again after the sun rose. Nothing unusual. But as I was leaving, something caught my eye on the floor. A small sticker. The kind stores give to kids, a cartoon bear face with the store logo. Fresh, clean, untorn. We hadn't given out stickers in years. I didn't touch it. 2 weeks later, I quit. Filled out the form, handed in the badge, walked out into the cold morning air feeling lighter and heavier all at once. But before I left, as I cleaned out my locker, a slip of paper fluttered out of the vented top. A narrow strip, torn from a longer sheet. It had a time written on it, 2:43 a.m., and underneath, in a shaky hand, "Don't be here." That was the exact minute I had seen the child. I never went back, never asked questions, never checked the news. But some nights, when I'm at a different store or walking down brightly lit aisles, I catch myself glancing toward the far end of a row, expecting to see someone standing perfectly still. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear the soft padding of bare feet on polished tile. Coming closer,